MysteryWire.com, home of the unusual and unknown. From Area 51 to the paranormal, it's your source to the most vetted UFO stories and special investigations in the world. Take a journey into the universe of MysteryWire.com.
Nick Redfern, you are a prolific writer, an investigator, looking into topics near and dear to my heart: paranormal phenomena, UFOs, cover-ups, conspiracies. But the one story that really got under your skin that you've been pursuing for, I guess, decades now, is the death of Marilyn Monroe and the different fingers that stem from her death. What is it? How is it that that particular story grabbed you and took you down this rabbit hole?
Well, I think more than anything else, George, really, it's the emotive side of it. You know, we're not just talking about UFOs and aliens and sightings in the sky. You know, we're talking about an American icon whose life was snuffed out. And I always feel, you know, in a situation like this, a sinister, mysterious death, it really should be dealt with. And I felt, you know, the onus was on somebody to really look into it as deep as possible to try and put the facts straight versus the lies straight. You know.
She dies in August 1962. I don't know if you were even alive then. So were you around when she died?
No, I hadn't been born.
Yeah. So I mean, she was an icon, obviously a big star back then. She is just as big today. You see her image everywhere. Were you a fan? Did you become a fan of her films and work as a result of jumping into this investigation?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, you know, she was someone who was a very skilled actress. You know, she was always portrayed as this sort of ditzy blonde, you know, which is actually very different from the reality of situation. And if you look at some of her movies, you know, I mean, like, for example, Some Like It Hot, you know, which is like a classic, hysterically funny movie, you know, and then, but then she could sort of like turn on a dime and do something, you know, really dramatic. And so, yeah, I had a good appreciation, you know, of her ability, you know, to actually sort of reel in the audience. And but the more I got into the story of her death, the more and more, to me, none of it kind of really made sense, unless, of course, you were willing to sort of stretch things to the absolute, you know, the situation where you just would not believe that this could happen, and under normal circumstances.
So you've been down some pretty dark alleyways in pursuit of the truth here, and we'll get into some of what you have uncovered. But to start with, her death, an overdose. We're not exactly sure if it's suicide or an accidental overdose. But what about the existing body of information, not controversial, that you found intriguing and that you thought maybe didn't make sense? What do we know about her death on the record that is suspicious?
Well, that's a good question, because she died on August the 4th, 1962, Hollywood. And the big question is, did she kill herself? Was it a suicide? Was it sort of a call for help? And she overdid it and not really intending to kill herself? Or was it possibly some sort of a hit, you know, a direct hit to take her out of circulation? All three situations are controversial. Now, when it comes to the angle of the final hours of Marilyn's life, there are a number of mysteries that surround this particular situation. What we know for sure is that in the hours leading to her death, she made a number of phone calls. We know from testimony from some of her staff that, you know, she was taking drugs on that night. Now, the big question is, was it a suicide, or was it almost like an allowed suicide? That's one of the key theories, the idea that she wasn't sort of forcibly killed, but she was placed into deliberately in the days and weeks prior to her death that she was being deliberately pushed into sort of a road of depression and anxiety, to the point where she just could not stand this sort of psychological warfare anymore and decided to kill herself. However, there are rumors also of a mysterious situation with one of the doors being deliberately left open on her home, as if somebody was going to be allowed inside the building. We know there were discrepancies with clothing and bedding moved around on the bed on the night. And also, things like this, where you put it all together and you have these snippets, if you like, of a mystery and certainly suspicions. So for me, you put it together and it doesn't just come together as just a sad situation.
One of the things that you uncovered is an astonishing document prepared by the CIA that essentially outlines how to kill somebody, how to commit an assassination. Tell us about that document, how you acquired it, and what's in it.
Well, yeah, it's important to know, George, that this is not some kind of questionable document. It's actually a document that surfaced under the terms of the Freedom of Information Act. And it's called A Study of Assassination. And as incredible as it might sound, it's actually a document that tells CIA personnel how to kill someone without actually making it look like a murder. In other words, the document is designed to tell agents how to murder someone with drugs, by throwing them off a building, etc., etc. And it looks like something tragic but innocent. Now, one of the most fascinating parts of this document is a reference to finding, if you need to kill someone, get them in a vulnerable situation, maybe ply them with alcohol and drugs, and make it look like a very tragic, sad suicide. And it almost mirrors final hours of Marilyn herself. It's very, very similar. It's like looking in a mirror. And when you read that, it really is difficult not to believe that the document and Marilyn's death were part and parcel of one.
So, a lot of people have looked into the death. There have been books written, there have been TV specials and documentaries and things of that sort. One of the controversial figures in this topic is a private investigator who reportedly has written all this down, the different leads that he followed. You have been chasing after that part of the story for a long time. Who was this guy? Is there a document that can be verified? And what did he conclude? If we're talking about the CIA has a method for assassinating people, why do you think somebody would want to murder Marilyn Monroe to presumably shut her up?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. And that really kind of gets to the crux of the story. Now, what we know for sure is that the guy who really kicked all this off was a man named Milo Spiriglio. Now, Spiriglio, from the 80s through the 90s, he wrote he wrote 3 books on Marilyn's death. And he was someone who was, I would say he had an obsession. I don't mean that necessarily in a bad way, but he was someone who was really driven to find out what had happened to Marilyn's death. Now, the reason why Spiriglio made so many sort of efforts and successful efforts to try and find out the truth was because, number one, he was a skilled writer, and number two, he was a private detective. So he was someone who could really get into, some of these mysterious stories. And as I said, he'd written 3 books. And like a lot of authors, like me, people come forward to you and share information. Hey, I read your book and I wanted to tell you A, B, C, X, Y, Z. And one of the most fascinating things is that Spiriglio in the early 1990s was given access to a very controversial document that purports to be a genuine CIA document. And it basically documents a conversation between two people, Howard Rothberg, who was an interior designer in New York, and the other one, Dorothy Kilgallen, who was a very famous and well-respected journalist in the 50s and the 1960s. And the document is essentially a collection of wiretap conversations between Rothberg and Kilgallen, who, by the way, were both friends with Marilyn, and they were also had connections to other people in Hollywood, and interestingly, also people within the intelligence community. And the document talks about Kilgallen and the two of them talking about information that they've been given, not just from Marilyn, but Marilyn's friends. And reportedly, there were rumors flying around the CIA that the Kennedy brothers, Robert and John F. Kennedy, as a means to kind of entice Marilyn into the bedroom, so to speak, they went down a very dangerous path. Namely, the two Kennedys decided to get Marilyn in the bedroom. Why don't we reveal to her some really interesting government secrets? And according to this document, the Kennedys told Marilyn about plans to invade Cuba, to assassinate Fidel Castro, even to work alongside the mafia if needed. And then you've got the most controversial angle of all, namely that JFK revealed to Marilyn that the US government had got its hands on a crashed UFO and these strange little bodies that nobody really knew what to do about this. There was a lot of fear and worry in the government, and the story had to be hidden. Unfortunately, of course, the Kennedys had blown the whistle already, and from there, what we know for sure is that it was right after the date of the document that Marilyn was found dead. So the inference here is that because Marilyn had been recklessly given access to all these secrets, essentially for certain people in government, she had to go.
Since John Kennedy's assassination, and since his brother's assassination in 1968, we've learned a great deal about the Kennedys and their proclivities back in those days. Is there objective evidence to suggest that one or both of them did have an affair with Marilyn Monroe, in which case it's possible that pillow talk secrets might have been spilled?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you go to the FBI's website, which is called the Vault, vault.gov, you can now download all the FBI's files on Marilyn. It's around about 200 pages now. And we know that prior to that, a significant number of documents were either shredded, burned, or just taped away. We just don't know. But what we do know for sure, if you go to that website and read the files that have been declassified under the terms of the Freedom of Information Act, what you will find is a large body of data collected by J. Edgar Hoover, who was the director of the FBI at the time. And those documents throughout that file talk about Robert Kennedy having clandestine meetings with Marilyn, hotels, motels, parties, things like this. And less so certainly with JFK, but there is reason to believe that they'd had sort of liaisons on at least 2 occasions. But with Robbie, it sort of sees far more than, what we would expect from the president or the attorney general.
I remember that video of, the film footage of Marilyn Monroe singing "Happy Birthday, Mr. President" to John Kennedy. It certainly looked like they had some kind of a relationship going on in there, intimated. How do you size up the idea that JFK may have known something about a crash saucer, alien bodies, and maybe even visited Area 51, a story that we have pursued, by the way, here too?
Yeah. Well, one of the intriguing things that I find about this document some people have said, well, it's just too far out, the idea that not only would Marilyn be murdered, but she would be murdered for what she knew about aliens and Roswell and Area 51. However, if you read that document, it actually doesn't read by like a regular document that would be a hoax. I mean, for example, over the years, I've investigated a number of hoaxes. And one of the things I've found with a hoax is that the people who create them, they typically almost always overplay the story as a means so the reader knows exactly what's going on. If you read that document, it actually doesn't even mention the words aliens or extraterrestrials. It talks about dead bodies. It doesn't talk about flying saucers or UFOs. It talks about a spacecraft. So when you've got the issue of dead bodies and spacecraft, that's actually leaving it in the mind of the reader in a very sort of grey situation rather than a clear situation. Hoaxes don't usually do that. They really usually put the whole thing out there, and there can be no, sort of denial of the story. I mean, one of the things I talk about in the book is the fact that you could actually talk about this being sort of like an early Russian space flight before pre-Gagarin that nobody knew about, and maybe what the US recovered, the dead bodies, as I mentioned in the document, maybe they were dead cosmonauts, and the craft that was found was a Soviet craft. So now I'm not sure if that is the case, but the point is the document is put together in a way where it isn't over sensationalized, and that's something you hardly ever see in a hoax situation.
The question is, was Marilyn on the verge of spilling some secrets about UFOs, the Kennedys, cover-ups, things of that sort? You do have some indications that she was blabbing to some friends.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. She had what she used to call her diary of secrets. Now, the diary of secrets, it was actually encouraged by Joan DiMaggio, one of her husbands. He said to Marilyn, just out of the blue one day, you're doing all this work out in Hollywood, meeting all these people. Why don't you put together like a journal and a diary? Like a lot of people do. This is what I did today. I met this actress, I met that person, we went to this party, that kind of thing. However, Marilyn, I mentioned this earlier, this kind of angle of the Dixie Blonde, which actually was nothing like the real thing. And just as a little aside, Marilyn in 1955 applied to have a visa to take her to Russia. She wanted to know what the Soviet Union was really like. That was when J. Edgar Hoover opened a file on her, which isn't surprising. However, the more and more she developed this interest in the world stage, politics, and so on, what she did was to change this diary from being Dear Diary, who I met today, and it became sort of a diary that detailed all the things that the Kennedy brothers had told her, and other people in politics as well. And we know for people who were friends that she had this diary, and it did contain information about how she knew that Castro was going to be assassinated, that the mafia and the CIA were going to work hand in hand, so to speak. And of course, a diary like that would be, incredibly dangerous for the person who held it. What we know for sure is that when she died and her body was taken to the morgue, a number of Marilyn's possessions were taken to the morgue as well. They were held there for 2 or 3 days. And a number of the staff said that they saw this thick diary of Marilyn's in the morgue for a number of days. Then maybe the day after or the day after that, nobody's entirely sure, but a team of guys in suits come along and the diary is taken away. And there are rumours that there could have been more diaries. It would make sense over the case of like 4 or 5 years. She's going to need more than one diary. And so the possibility is that, yes, one we know for sure vanished in the morgue or from the morgue, but there is this intriguing possibility there could be other diaries somewhere sitting around in the darkness in somebody's attic. Some old CIA guy maybe's got one of the journals sitting away in the as I said, in the attic, just waiting to blow the whole thing wide open, really.
Well, that's the Holy Grail. That's your Holy Grail you've been chasing all these years. As you travel around working on different books and going to conferences and speaking, you continue to collect information about this, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, my view has always been, if you're going to investigate something, whether it's UFOs, aliens, conspiracies, I feel the best thing to do is to take a journalistic approach, no matter how controversial the story might be. And, I mean, there's multiple different ways to get data. I think the best way is to literally go knocking on the doors of that old guy who maybe knows something, and if he doesn't let you in, well, you try and find a way in, and you find a way to get them to talk. And what happens from there, you've got piece one, piece two, and then the jigsaw starts to get bigger and bigger and better. But I always tell people, if you're going to do something like this, you really have to have the guts and the ability to knock on that door and make sure it stays open, that it doesn't have the door pushed on you. And that's what you have to do. You've just got to keep pushing and pushing again.
Tell us about the book, the title, how people can find it, and also your decision to tell this from a first person. I've read a lot of your books, most of them, in fact, and I don't remember it being a first person type of an account, but it's really a fascinating story of how you pursue this down various rabbit holes and dark alleys.
Well, the book is called Diary of Secrets, and the subtitle is UFO Conspiracies and the Mysterious Death of Marilyn Monroe. Now, if you're going to write a book like this, you could write it from two perspectives. One being, you just tell the story. However, the story itself, the investigation in itself, sort of dictated that I had to get out there and interview these elderly people who, sort of 50 years after, some of them still alive, kind of ready to talk, but also a little bit kind of shy, if you like, or concerned, frightened even. But in saying that, just the issue of road trips, I kind of felt that, well, the reason why I called it the Diary of Secrets was because it reflected Marilyn's, her life and the last days and weeks and months of her life. But in saying that, it's also sort of a nod in my order as well, in the sense that the diary approach is also what I'm taking. It's kind of this ironic situation. Marilyn, put all this information together in her diary, and to allow me to follow on, I had to put my own diary together and put it all together and then present it in a kind of like a journal type situation. I felt that was the best way so the reader could sort of follow me along, whether it's on the plane, in the truck, or the hired car from the airport, and then off to find the old guy.
Well, there are certainly parts of this that have proven to be true. The story that Marilyn was given access to some secrets by the Kennedy brothers, things that turned out to be real. The planned assassination of Castro, the working with the mob, the planned invasion of Cuba, those things were real. If they, in fact, told her about UFOs, crash saucers, spacecraft, whatever, my gosh, that could be quite a revelation if the CIA document, the wiretaps, turns out to be real, or if you could find one volume of her diary.
Well, yeah, you're right. And that when you talk about, trying to validate all of this, finding the evidence. One of the most fascinating things that I found, again, using the Freedom of Information Act, I thought, well, one of the guys, or the main guy who's been dealing with this and looking into it, was Milo Spiriglio, who died in 2010. Journalist, private detective, very skilled guy. And I thought to myself, well, if the CIA was really concerned about this document, you would think they would open a file on him. So what did I do? Well, I filed a request with the CIA to see if there was anything on Spiriglio. Lo and behold, I actually got about a 40-page file all about Spiriglio. Now, much of this document was really interesting because what it was, CIA, going back to the early 1980s, had collected just about every American newspaper that Spiriglio had ever been mentioned in, and I'm not exaggerating. And in every article where somebody in the CIA had clipped this newspaper article, photocopied it, put it in the Spiriglio file, what I found when the files reached me, every time in those newspapers it said Diary of Secrets or Secret Diary, somebody in the CIA had underlined it with a black marker, where somebody had mentioned Castro, Bay of Pigs, things like that. All of that had been marked with the black marker. Now, the document itself, the Spiriglio document, talks about the very same things. And these go back to the early 1980s, the CIA file. And the Spiriglio file, the document, didn't surface until the 1990s. So there's no way somebody could have sort of fabricated that Spiriglio document without knowing that it would parallel 10 years later this CIA document.
There are, similarities to the JFK assassination theories. There are some spillover. Some of the characters who were involved in the Marilyn Monroe story and the JFK assassination also spill over into the UFO topic. One of them being Dorothy Kilgallen. Her death was also suspicious and has raised a lot of questions over the years, right?
Yeah, well, Dorothy Kilgallen, as I said earlier, very respected journalist. She did a lot of TV shows and fun shows as well, but primarily she was an investigative journalist. And to the extent that I was able to get her FBI file, not a CIA file, I got a CIA file, but it was just a small one. Most of it was still classified. But the FBI did declassify to me their file on Kilgallen, which was about 250 pages covering the 1930s to the 60s. Now, in 1955, May 55, Marilyn went on vacation with her husband at the time to the UK and met with a number of sort of important figures within the UK government and the military. One of them we know is a man named Lord Mountbatten, who was connected with the Royal. And the story is that Kilgallen was approached by Lord Mountbatten and basically said, I respect your research and your writing, and I'd like to share this story with you. The story that Mountbatten shared with Kilgallen was that the UK and the US were working on this highly classified dual program because both sides, the UK and the US, had reportedly recovered crashed UFOs and these strange little bodies. And Kilgallen actually, when she got back home, she wrote a lengthy article talking about all of this, and she never really forgot about that UFO angle. And when there was an intriguing UFO story, she would write it up. But like with Marilyn, for Kilgallen, for Dorothy Kilgallen, it came to sort of a young age, death at a young age. She was only in her 50s when she was found dead in her bed. Now, some people said, well, anyone could die dead in their bed. But what's intriguing is the fact that she was found in one particular bed in her house. She had never, ever slept in that particular bed at any time. It was sort of like, any visitors, they could have that bed, that kind of situation. So one of the theories is that somebody got in the house, gave her an overdose of drugs, and then put her in the spare room, not realizing that was actually not really her room. Now that itself is an intriguing aspect. She's going to murder herself. Why should she put herself into another bedroom to the one that she'd slept in previous decades of her life? And of course, she was also tied into the JFK assassination. She was looking into the Warren Commission. She was the first person to do an interview with Jack Ruby, the guy who shot and killed Lee Harvey Oswald. So, you've got all these threads going from UFOs to Dorothy Kilgallen, who knew Marilyn. Kilgallen was connected to the JFK assassination. And of course, with the JFK assassination, we've got JFK, who reportedly gave some of his story about UFOs and aliens to Marilyn. So you've really got like a circular situation with multiple different sources all coming together, and in some cases, fatal situations.
Another name that pops up, Guy Bannister. I'm not going to give that part of it away. Guy Bannister, former FBI agent. People who have looked into the JFK assassination will remember that name. The name came up. Ed Asner played Guy Bannister in the Oliver Stone film. He investigated UFOs or reported on UFOs for the FBI and was right there in the thick of things for Oswald in New Orleans and all that stuff. But I'll save that. People need to read the book. You take it in a lot of different directions. It's a terrific read, Nick. I know that you're going to continue working on it, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, strangely enough, already had a few leads and people who knew more information about some of the people in the book. And that's actually one of the things that I hope, will work with the book. That, as I said earlier, that if you write a book, people sort of want to speak to you if they know something. And so my view is just to keep pushing and keep looking for more and more data and take this story just about as far as I'm able to.
So if somebody sees this interview and wants to share information with you, where do they contact it?
Well, I have a blog called World of Whatever. So just Google Nick Redfern, World of Whatever. You can reach me at Twitter, Nick Redfern UFO. Click on Facebook, you'll soon see me just sort of waving out of the internet. So.
Someday we'll talk in person about JFK's visit to the Nevada test site, because he did come to the test site to take a tour. There was a missing hour where he got on a helicopter, flew away. A lot of folks have speculated that he used that time to go to Area 51 to see the goodies. So it's a cool angle that we can talk about in person sometime. But Nick, thanks very much. The book is great. I hope people check it out, and we'll be in touch.
Great. Thanks a lot, George.
Thank you.
Talk to you later.
Right.